The sun rose over the Amazon rainforest, but it offered no salvation. Clark Kent, no Superman, though the name felt like a cruel joke now, dragged himself through mud and vines, his body screaming protests he hadn't felt in years. Blood, his own blood, seeped from cuts across his chest where the tree branches had torn through what remained of his suit during the fall. The cape was gone. The symbol on his chest was shredded. And the sun, that golden orb climbing above the canopy, gave him nothing. He'd tried, God, he'd tried. When he first crashed through the dimensional barrier, some weapon of brainiacs that had torn reality itself, he'd reached for the sun's power like a drowning man reaching for air. But this universe's physics were wrong. The solar radiation touched his cells and slid off like water on glass. He could feel a trickle of energy, barely enough to keep him standing, but the godlike strength that had let him move planets was gone. He'd tested it on a fallen tree. His enhanced muscles had barely shifted the trunk. He was stronger than human, yes, faster, more durable. He'd taken a bullet from a poacher's rifle an hour ago. The ricochet had bruised his ribs instead of piercing his heart. But invulnerability, flight, the powers that made him Superman, this universe had stripped them away like a judge revoking citizenship. Here, he was just Clark Kent with enhanced abilities, an Olympic athlete with better-than-human senses in a body that could finally break. And something was hunting him. He'd heard the clicking first, a sound like mandibles scraping against metal, emanating from the trees above. Then came the shimmer, that telltale distortion of light that his X-ray vision couldn't penetrate. His enhanced hearing caught the whisper of branches bending under weight, the hum of technology far beyond anything this Earth, should possess. The Predator, because that's what the terrified Colombian soldiers had called it before the plasma bolts had painted the jungle red, was tracking him. Clark pressed his back against a massive ceiba tree, controlling his breathing. His enhanced hearing picked up the creature's movement, circling, patient. In his universe, he would have flown up, confronted it, tried to communicate. Here he was prey. The realization sat in his stomach like a stone. Superman, the last son of Krypton, the man of steel, reduced to hiding like a terrified animal. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. The clicking stopped. Silence pressed down on the jungle, broken only by distant bird calls and his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Clark's eyes tracked the canopy, cataloging every shadow, every shimmer of light. There, 30 feet up, movement against the leaves. The Predator was repositioning, finding the perfect angle for a kill shot. Clark moved. His enhanced speed carried him in a sprint that would shame any Olympic runner, weaving between trees as plasma bolts scorched the air where he'd stood. The heat washed over him, singing his skin. In his universe, he wouldn't have felt it. Here, it burned. He dove behind an outcropping of roots as another bolt exploded against the ceiba, showering him with burning splinters. His mind raced, analyzing, adapting. The creature was testing him, he realized. The first shots had been warning shots meant to drive him to see how he moved. This wasn't an execution. This was a hunt, and the hunter was savoring it. Clark's hand found a fallen branch, thick as his forearm. It would have to do. His heat vision flickered weakly in his eyes. He could feel the power there, but it was like trying to light a fire with damp kindling. Enough to cauterize a wound, maybe, but not to cut through the Predator's armor. He was a god with a stick, facing an alien warrior with plasma cannons and cloaking technology. The unfairness of it threatened to overwhelm him. He'd fought Darkseid, Doomsday, Brainiac, beings of cosmic power who tested him to his absolute limits. But he'd always had his powers, his hope, his certainty that he could protect people. What was Superman without the ability to save everyone? What was the symbol worth when the man beneath it could bleed out in the jungle, unmourned and unknown? A shimmer descended from the trees, landing 20 feet away with a thud that shook the ground. The cloaking field deactivated, revealing the Predator in full. 8 feet of biomechanical armor, dreadlock-like appendages hanging from its masked head, plasma caster swiveling on its shoulder. But it wasn't aiming at him. Instead, it reached to its side and drew wrist blades with a metallic skiing that echoed through the jungle. Clark understood. This creature, this Yautja, as the dying soldier had gasped, was giving him a chance. Not mercy, never mercy, but the honor of facing it in combat. The ultimate trophy would mean nothing if taken from a cowering victim. It wanted Superman to fight. And God help him, Superman rose to meet it. He stepped into the clearing, branch gripped in both hands like a quarterstaff. The predator cocked its head, mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. Its wrist computer activated, scanning him, and Clark saw data scrolling across its vision, analyzing his physiology, cataloging his enhancements, measuring his worth as prey. The creature's body language shifted. Interest became focus. Focus became hunger. The predator charged. Clark's enhanced reflexes saved his life. He sidestepped the first slash, felt the wrist blades pass inches from his throat. His branch came up, blocking the second strike, and the impact vibrated through his arms with enough force to crack the wood. In his universe, he would have caught the blades barehanded. Here, the wood was all that stood between him and dismemberment. They circled each other in the clearing, predator and prey, though which remained unclear. The Yautja was faster than anything human, but Clark's Kryptonian biology, even diminished, gave him the edge in raw speed. The creature was stronger, but not overwhelmingly so. Clark had wrestled it to a standstill when it tried to grapple him, both of them straining, muscles trembling. The predator pulled back, reassessing. Its mandibles spread in what Clark realized was a grin. This was what it wanted, a worthy opponent. A trophy that would bring honor to its clan. It reached to its belt and drew a combistic, extending the weapon to full length with a snap. 7 feet of alien alloy, razor-sharp at both ends, humming with some kind of energy field. Clark's branch wouldn't survive another exchange. He knew it. The predator knew it. But surrender wasn't in Clark Kent's vocabulary, not in any universe. He adjusted his grip, planted his feet, and prepared to sell his life dearly. If he was going to die in this jungle, far from home, far from Lois and Ma and the planet he'd sworn to protect, he'd die as Superman. The symbol might be shredded, the powers might be gone, but the principle remained. Hope, always hope, even in the darkest moment. The predator lunged. Clark met it. The branch shattered on the first impact, splinters exploding outward. Clark rolled under the second thrust, came up inside the creature's guard, and drove his fist into its midsection with every ounce of his diminished strength. The armor absorbed most of it, but he felt something give, ribs cracking beneath the biomesh. The predator roared, a sound like tearing metal, and backhanded him across the clearing. Clark hit a tree hard enough to crack the bark, stars exploding across his vision. He'd been hit harder, Darkseid's Omega beams, Doomsday's fists, but those battles had been waged by Superman. This was Clark Kent feeling his ribs grind, tasting blood in his mouth, struggling to breathe through what might be a punctured lung. The predator approached slowly, combistic ready for the killing blow, mandibles clicking a victory hymn. Then the gunfire erupted from the jungle. A team of soldiers, Colombian Special Forces by their gear, burst into the clearing, rifles blazing. The rounds sparked off the predator's armor, doing no real damage but forcing it to turn, to reassess the new threats. Its plasma caster swiveled, acquiring targets. Clark saw the red targeting lasers dance across the soldiers' chests, saw the weapons charge with a rising whine. He moved without thinking. His enhanced speed carried him forward in a stumbling run, tackling the nearest soldier as the plasma bolt scorched the air above them. They hit the ground rolling as the jungle behind them exploded into flame. More bolts followed, turning soldiers into screaming torches, painting the clearing with hellfire. "Run," Clark gasped, his voice raw. "You can't fight it, run." But they were soldiers, trained to stand their ground, and they died like soldiers, brave and futile. The predator moved through them like death incarnate, wrist blades flashing, plasma caster reducing men to ash. Clark tried to help, tried to pull them to safety, but his diminished powers made him just another target. A plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and he hit the ground with agony screaming through his nerve endings. The smell of his own burning flesh filled his nostrils. His uniform smoldered, the edges of the S blackening. He forced himself to his knees, heat vision flickering weakly in his eyes, and saw the last soldier, a young man who couldn't be more than 20, frozen in terror as the Predator advanced on him. Clark Kent had been raised by Jonathan and Martha Kent to believe that every life mattered, that the symbol on his chest meant something sacred, that someone, somewhere, would always stand between the innocent and the darkness. His powers were gone. His body was failing, but the principle remained. Superman rose. His heat vision, weak as it was, lanced out and struck the Predator's shoulder cannon. The targeting mechanism sparked, went dark. The creature whirled, surprised, and in that moment, Clark crossed the distance and drove his shoulder into its midsection, using every ounce of his enhanced strength to drive it backward. They crashed through burning undergrowth, rolling, struggling. Clark's hands found the combistic, twisted it from the creature's grip, and in one desperate motion, drove the blade through the gap in its armor, into its side. The Predator's roar shook the jungle. Green blood, fluorescent, acidic, sprayed across Clark's chest, burning through what remained of his suit. But the creature wasn't dead, not even close. It grabbed him by the throat, lifted him with terrifying ease, and Clark felt his enhanced durability tested to its breaking point. His vision darkened. His lungs screamed for air. Then a voice crackled from the Predator's wrist computer, guttural, clicking, alien, but the message was clear. A command. A recall. The creature's grip loosened slightly, and Clark saw its mandibles work in frustration. It held him there a moment longer, suspended, its biomask inches from his face. Then deliberately, it hurled him across the clearing like a discarded toy. Clark hit the ground and didn't move. Couldn't move. Through blurred vision, he watched the Predator activate its cloaking field and disappear into the canopy, leaving behind only corpses and burning jungle. The young soldier stumbled over, hands shaking, and knelt beside him. What are you?" the soldier whispered in Spanish. Clark coughed, tasted blood, a long way from home. The soldier's radio crackled. More voices, more teams converging on the firefight. Clark forced himself to sit up, wincing at the screaming pain in his shoulder where the plasma had burned through muscle. He looked down at his chest, at the tattered remains of the symbol his Kryptonian parents had given him, the symbol that had stood for hope across 1,000 battles. Here, in this universe of predators and prey, what did that symbol mean? The answer came to him as he helped the soldier to his feet, as they stumbled toward the sound of the approaching teams. It meant the same thing it had always meant. That someone would stand. That someone would fight. That even when the god became mortal, even when the powers fled and the body broke, the principle remained sacred. Hope, always hope. Even grounded, even bleeding, even stripped of everything that made him super, Clark Kent would find a way to be Superman. This universe had taken his powers. It would not take his purpose. The Predator had marked him as prey, but Clark Kent had never been prey in his life. And if these hunters wanted a trophy, if they wanted to test themselves against the Last Son of Krypton, they would learn a hard lesson. Superman didn't need to fly to inspire hope. He just needed to stand. And God, as his witness, stripped of powers or not, cast into a universe of nightmare and violence, Clark Kent would stand. The hunters were coming. Let them come. They would find that some symbols, some principles, transcended power itself. The sun climbed higher, offering no comfort, no strength. Clark Kent walked into the jungle, toward the sound of human voices, carrying a wounded soldier in his arms. Behind him in the trees, the clicking resumed. Patient, hungry. The predators were watching, always watching. The hunt had only just begun. The Colombian military base squatted in the jungle like a concrete tumor, all razor wire and watchtowers and men with haunted eyes. Clark sat in the medical tent, while a field surgeon worked on his shoulder. The plasma burned deeper than he'd thought. The doctor's hands trembled as he cleaned the wound, degree burns in a pattern no earthly weapon could make. "You should be dead," the doctor muttered in accented English, threading a needle. "This kind of trauma, the shock alone." Clark said nothing. What could he say? That a week ago he could have healed this in minutes. That he'd survived omega beams and kryptonite poisoning and the cold of space itself. Here, in this universe, he was just a man with slightly better than human biology, and even that was fatting. He'd tested himself that morning. His strength was down to maybe 4 tons, his speed barely superhuman. Whatever connection his cells had to solar energy was weakening daily, as if this universe itself was rejecting the concept of Kryptonian power. The tent flap opened, and Colonel Ramirez entered, a hard-eyed woman in her 50s who commanded the base's Special Operations Unit. She'd been debriefed on Clark's rescue of Private Mendoza, though her expression suggested she believed maybe half of what she'd heard. "Senor Kent," she said, dismissing the doctor with a gesture, "we need to talk about what you are and what you're doing in my jungle." Clark met her gaze steadily. Truth, always truth even when it sounded insane. "I'm not from here, not from this world. There was an accident, a weapon that tore through dimensions. I ended up here, and I'm trying to survive, same as you." Ramirez studied him for a long moment. "Mendoza says you moved faster than human, took a plasma bolt that should have killed you, fought one of those things hand to hand and lived." She leaned forward. "I've been hunting these creatures for 3 years, lost 2 teams to them, and you fought one with a stick." "I got lucky." "You got skilled." She pulled a tablet from her jacket, called up footage from a drone that had captured part of the fight. Clark watched himself on screen, diminished, desperate, but still moving with precision that no human could match. "That's not luck, that's training. Military, special operations." Clark shook his head. "I was a reporter, but where I come from I learned to fight, to protect people." He touched the tattered symbol on his chest. "This meant something. I'm trying to make it still mean something here." Ramirez sat back, processing. Around them, the camp bustled with activity, soldiers loading weapons, technicians calibrating sensors, pilots pre-flighting helicopters. 3 years of war against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't defeat. The desperation was palpable. "We have 20 confirmed kills in the last month," Ramirez said quietly. "Military, police, civilians. They're escalating, getting bolder. Our government denies it publicly, calls them drug cartel murders, but we know the truth." She looked at Clark with something approaching hope. "If you can fight them, if you can help us understand them, maybe we have a chance." Before Clark could respond, alarms shrieked through the base. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions as the command center erupted in frantic Spanish. Ramirez was on her feet instantly, hand on her sidearm. "What is it?" Clark demanded, following her out of the tent. "Perimeter breach, eastern sector." She broke into a run toward the command center, Clark closed behind. Inside, screens showed thermal and optical feeds from the jungle surrounding the base. At first Clark saw nothing, just trees and shadows. Then he noticed the distortions, 3, maybe 4, shimmer shapes moving through the undergrowth with predatory purpose. "They've never attacked a base before," Ramirez breathed. "They hunt individuals, small units, this is." "Different," Clark finished. His enhanced hearing picked up the clicking, that distinctive predator communication coming from multiple directions. They were coordinating, flanking. They're not hunting anymore. They're making a statement. The first plasma bolt struck the eastern watchtower, vaporizing it in a flash of superheated air. Soldiers scattered as more bolts rained down, turning vehicles into funeral pyres. The base's automated defenses came online, machine gun turrets tracking heat signatures, floodlights blazing, but the Predator's cloaking technology rendered them nearly invisible. Clark's tactical mind, honed through years of fighting cosmic threats, assessed the situation with brutal clarity. The base was a killing ground. Open fields of fire, minimal cover, defenders visible against the floodlights while attackers remained invisible. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. "Fall back to the armory," he said, gripping Ramirez's shoulder. "Reinforced concrete limited approaches. Make them come to you in tight quarters where their cloaking matters less. And leave the base to them. It's already theirs." Clark pointed to the screens where more shimmer shapes appeared at the southern perimeter. "They're hurting you. They want you panicked, scattered. Don't give them what they want." Ramirez hesitated only a heartbeat before barking orders into her radio. Soldiers began a fighting retreat, laying down suppressing fire as they fell back toward the armory complex. Clark moved with them, his enhanced senses tracking the invisible hunters. There, a shimmer moving toward a group of pinned-down soldiers. He sprinted across open ground, feeling impossibly vulnerable, and tackled the nearest soldier as a plasma bolt scorched the air above them. "Move, go." He hauled the man to his feet, pushing him toward the armory. Another bolt struck the ground where they'd stood, melting concrete into slag. The retreat was chaos. Men died screaming, turned to ash by plasma fire or torn apart by wrist blades when predators materialized from nowhere. Clark saved who he could, his diminished powers still enough to pull soldiers from death's path, to spot the telltale shimmer a second before the kill. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Bodies littered the compound, and with each death, Clark felt the weight of his lost powers like chains around his neck. Superman could have saved them all. Clark Kent could only save some. They made the armory, 43 soldiers out of nearly 100. Ramirez locked the heavy doors and deployed defensive positions at every entrance. The building was solid, built to withstand insurgent attacks, but the plasma weaponry made a mockery of earthly fortifications. Scorch marks appeared on the walls as the predators tested their defenses, probing for weakness. Clark found himself at a gun slit, staring out at the burning base, and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was his fault. The predator he'd fought, the one he'd wounded, it had summoned its clan. He was the reason they'd come. The ultimate trophy, drawing hunters from across the stars. These soldiers were dying because of him. "They want you," Ramirez said, appearing beside him. She'd figured it out too. "You're what's different. You wounded one of them in single combat. In their culture, that means something." Clark's jaw tightened. "Then maybe I should go out there, end this. And give them what they want." She chambered a round in her rifle. "Screw that. We stand together or die together. That's what soldiers do." Her words echoed something Jonathan Kent had once told him. Being a hero isn't about powers, son. It's about standing with people when it matters most. But Pa had said that in a universe where Clark could actually protect everyone. Here, his stand might just get more people killed. The clicking came from inside the armory. Soldiers spun, weapons tracking, as 3 predators materialized from the shadows. They'd been inside the whole time, cloaked, waiting. The armory, their refuge, was a trap. The slaughter began instantly. Wrist blades flashed in the fluorescent light. Plasma bolts turned the confined space into hell. Clark moved on instinct, tackling a predator before it could decapitate a soldier, his fists hammering into its armor with diminished strength. The creature threw him off like a child, its combistic extending with that distinctive snap. Time seemed to slow. Clark's enhanced perceptions caught every detail, the combistic arcing toward his chest, the soldier behind him frozen in horror, Ramirez bringing her rifle up too slowly. He'd seen his death before, seen Doomsday's fist and Darkseid's Omega beams and a dozen other apocalypses. But those had been threats to Superman. This was different. This was Clark Kent's mortality staring him in the face. The combistic struck his chest and stopped. Not because of invulnerability that was gone, but because Clark's hand had caught it inches from his heart. His palm was sliced open, blood streaming down the alien metal, but he held it. The predator pushed, expecting to drive the blade through easily, and found resistance. Not godlike resistance, not Kryptonian invulnerability, but something equally unbreakable. Will, pure, stubborn human will. Clark twisted, using the creature's momentum against it and wrenched the combistic from its grip. He reversed it in one motion and drove the blade through the gap in its armor, the same killing stroke he'd used in the jungle. The predator staggered, green blood fountaining, and Clark didn't hesitate. His heat vision, weak as it was, lanced out and struck its biomask's targeting system. Sparks flew. The creature roared, clawing at its face, and Clark drove the combistic deeper until the roar became a gurgle and then silence. The other two predators froze. Their mandibles clicked rapidly, communication assessment. One of them approached Clark slowly, head cocked, studying him. It reached down to its fallen comrade, retrieved something from its armor, then looked back at Clark. Its wrist computer activated, scrolling data, and Clark understood what was happening. They were reevaluating him, not as prey anymore, as something else. The predator extended its wrist blades, but not in threat, in salute. Then it and its companion activated their cloaking fields and vanished, leaving behind only their dead brother and 43 stunned survivors. Silence filled the armory, broken only by ragged breathing and the crackle of fires outside. Ramirez lowered her rifle slowly, staring at Clark with an expression caught between awe and terror. "What the hell was that?" someone whispered. Clark looked down at his bleeding palm, at the combistic still gripped in his other hand, at the dead predator at his feet. He'd killed. Not in his universe, where he'd sworn never to take a life, but here, where mercy meant death and hesitation killed those around you. The moral absolutes of Superman didn't translate to this universe of predators and prey. "That was them acknowledging a warrior," Ramirez said quietly. "In their culture, you just earned respect." She approached the dead predator, careful, and studied its armor. "I've researched them for 3 years. They have a code. They only hunt worthy prey. You killed one of their clan in honorable combat. They're treating you as an equal now." "I don't want their respect," Clark said, his voice raw. "I want them to stop killing." "Then you'll have to beat them, really beat them. Prove that humanity is worthy of something other than being prey." Ramirez pulled a data chip from her jacket. "We've been collecting intelligence, tracking patterns. There's a structure deep in the jungle, some kind of ship or temple. We think it's their base of operations." Clark studied the tactical map she pulled up on a salvaged tablet. The location was 50 miles into uncharted territory, accessible only by foot through some of the most dangerous jungle on Earth. Even with his enhanced abilities, it would take days of hard travel, and at the end there would be more predators, many more. "You're asking me to walk into their hunting ground," he said. "I'm asking you to end this war." She looked around at her battered soldiers, at the dead being carried in from outside, at the base burning beyond the armory walls. "They came here because of you. They'll keep coming, but if you face them, if you challenge them on their terms." She trailed off, the hope in her eyes desperate. Clark touched the tattered S on his chest. In his universe, Superman inspired hope through his presence, through the certainty that he could save everyone. Here, he inspired nothing. He was just another fighter, diminished and mortal, struggling to survive. But maybe that was enough. Maybe hope didn't require godhood. Maybe it just required someone willing to stand. "I'll need supplies," he said, "and someone who knows the jungle." "I'll take you myself," Ramirez offered her hand. "We'll leave at dawn." Clark shook it, feeling her grip, strong, calloused, the hand of a survivor. Around them, soldiers began treating wounded, reinforcing defenses, preparing for a siege that might never come now that the predators had what they wanted, acknowledgement of a worthy opponent. Private Mendoza approached, the young man Clark had saved in the jungle. He carried something wrapped in cloth, the tattered remains of Clark's cape, recovered from the crash site. "We found this, senor. Thought you might want it." Clark took the red fabric, so bright once, now faded and torn, just cloth. No Kryptonian technology, no indestructible fibers. In this universe, even his cape was mortal. But as he tied it around his shoulders, feeling its familiar weight, he felt something settle in his chest. Not power, purpose. The night passed in uneasy quiet. Soldiers stood watch, weapons ready, but the predators didn't return. Clark sat in the med tent, letting the doctor rebandage his hand, and thought about honor codes and moral compromises, and the price of being heroic in a universe that didn't believe in heroes. He'd killed tonight, taken a life to save lives. In his universe, Batman would have a contingency plan ready, disappointed in his failure. Superman never killed. Never. But that Superman had options this Clark didn't. That Superman could afford mercy because his power made mercy possible. Here, in this brutal reality, what were Superman's principles worth? The answer came as the sun rose over the smoking base. Everything. They were worth everything. He might have to kill to survive, might have to compromise his ideals to protect the innocent, but the core principle remained. Stand between the darkness and those who couldn't defend themselves. Be the symbol, even when the symbol was just a man with a stick and a prayer. Ramirez found him at dawn, gear-packed indigenous guide waiting. The man, Carlos, knew the deep jungle like his own skin. He'd seen the predators, survived encounters through knowledge and respect for their ways. He agreed to guide them for a single reason. He'd heard about the man who fought them and lived. "They call you El Hombre de Acero in the villages," Carlos said in Spanish. "The man of steel. They say you cannot die." Clark almost laughed. If only they knew how fragile steel could be in the wrong universe. But he said nothing, just checked his gear. The combistic from his kill, a salvaged plasma caster Ramirez's team had jury-rigged to work, and the tattered cape that represented everything he'd been. They entered the jungle as the sun climbed, 3 humans marching toward the heart of darkness. Behind them, the base prepared for the worst. Ahead, the predators waited, ready to test whether the man of steel could survive their ultimate hunt. Clark Kent walked into those shadows with his head high and his purpose clear. The powers were gone, the god was mortal, but the symbol endured. Hope endured. And if these hunters wanted to test him, if they wanted to see what Superman meant stripped of everything that made him super, they would learn a lesson that transcended universes. Some things don't need power to be unbreakable. Some symbols don't need gods to inspire hope. And some men, pushed to their absolute limit in a reality that didn't believe in heroes, would stand anyway. The hunt continued, let it come. The jungle consumed them. 3 days of slogging through mud and vines, of Carlos pointing out the nearly invisible signs, 3-toed tracks pressed into river banks, claw marks 20 feet up tree trunks, altars of human skulls arranged with ritualistic precision. The predators weren't just hunting here. They were claiming territory, marking their domain with the bones of those who'd failed their tests. Clark's powers continued their slow death. By the second day, his strength had dropped to maybe 2 tons, still superhuman but barely. His speed was Olympic level at best. The enhanced senses remained, thank God, because they were all that kept him alive when the traps started appearing. Invisible tripwires connected to plasma charges. Pits lined with stakes that would impale even his enhanced durability. The predators were testing him, preparing the killing ground. "They know we're coming," Ramirez said on the 3rd night, crouched beside their smokeless fire. Carlos had disappeared into the jungle to scout, leaving them alone with the clicking sounds that echoed through the canopy. "This whole approach is one long gauntlet." Clark nodded, cleaning the combistic with methodical precision. The weapon had saved his life twice more. Once when a young predator had ambushed them at a river crossing, testing its skills against the legendary Man of Steel, and again when something wrong, had attacked from the shadows. Not predators. Worse. The xenomorphs had been a nightmare Clark wasn't prepared for. The black biomechanical horror had erupted from the undergrowth with acidic drool and an inner jaw that punched through a tree trunk. Clark had fought it with the combistic, his diminished strength barely enough to pierce its exoskeleton, and when he'd finally killed it, the acid blood had eaten through his makeshift armor and scorched his ribs. "The predators hunt those things," Carlos had explained when he'd returned, staring at the steaming xenomorph corpse with wide eyes. They seed planets with them, create the ultimate prey. Then they hunt both the serpents and whatever indigenous species fights back. He'd looked at Clark with something approaching reverence. You killed a hard meat. With honor, the hunters will have seen this. Now, 3 days deep, Clark felt the weight of constant observation. They were being watched, evaluated, judged worthy or wanting by invisible arbiters who held human life in contempt. Every step was a test. Every survival was a past trial. And somewhere ahead in the structure that Carlos swore squatted in the jungle like a sleeping god, the real test awaited. "Tell me about where you come from," Ramirez said quietly, breaking his brooding. "This universe where you could fly, where you were actually super." Clark almost smiled. "It seems like a dream now, a place where the sun gave me godlike power, where I could hear a cry for help from across the planet and arrive in seconds, where I stood with other heroes, a team of the best humanity and aliens had to offer." He touched his tattered cape. "Where this symbol meant hope, where people looked up and knew someone would catch them." "It means hope here too," she said. "The villages we passed through, they're calling you El Ultimo, the last one, the last hero in a world of monsters." She leaned forward, firelight casting harsh shadows across her scarred face. "That means something, Clark, even if your powers are gone." "What good is hope if I can't save anyone?" The question came out harsher than intended. "In my universe, I never had to choose who lived. I could save everyone. Here, I'm making calculations, priorities, letting people die because I'm not fast enough or strong enough anymore." "Welcome to being human," Ramirez said without sympathy. "That's what command is, what leadership is, making impossible choices and living with the consequences." She poked the fire with a stick. "You think I don't count my dead? Every soldier lost is a name I'll carry forever, but I keep fighting because the alternative is letting the monsters win." Clark was silent for a long moment. In his universe, Batman had once told him that leadership wasn't about being the strongest, it was about making choices gods shouldn't have to make. Clark had never understood, not really, not when he could simply be strong enough to avoid those choices. Here, stripped of power, he was learning what Bruce had always known. Carlos emerged from the darkness, moving like a ghost. "The temple is 2 kilometers ahead, but there's something you need to see first." His expression was grim, something that changes everything. They followed him through the pre-dawn darkness, Clark's enhanced hearing picking up the increased clicking ahead, multiple predators, many more than they'd encountered so far. The jungle opened into a clearing and Clark froze. The structure was massive, pyramidal, covered in glyphs that hurt to look at directly. But that wasn't what stopped his heart. It was the humans. 50 of them, maybe more, suspended in the trees by the same biomechanical webbing the xenomorphs used. Most were dead, their chests burst open, but a dozen were still alive, breathing, crying out weakly, implanted with something that moved beneath their skin. Hosts for the xenomorphs, living incubators for the predator's ultimate prey. "Mother of God," Ramirez breathed. Clark was already moving, combat instincts overriding horror. He couldn't save them all. The chestbursters were too far along, maybe hours from emergence, but he could save some. He sprinted toward the nearest survivor, a young woman who sobbed in Spanish, begging for death. His heat vision, weak as it was, burned through the webbing. She fell into his arms, and he felt the thing inside her moving, pushing against her ribs from within. "Please," she gasped, "kill me, don't let it." A plasma bolt struck the ground at Clark's feet. He looked up to see predators emerging from the jungle, 5, 6, a dozen of them forming a circle around the clearing. But they weren't attacking. They were watching, waiting to see what he would do. This was another test, he realized with cold fury. A moral test. Would he honor their hunt, respect their ritual, or would he destroy their prey and face the consequences? Clark Kent had been raised to value every life. Superman had sworn to protect the innocent above all else. But the woman in his arms was already dead. They all were. The xenomorphs would burst free within hours, kill anyone trying to save their hosts, and create more hard meat for the predators to hunt. The equation was brutal. Mercy meant death for everyone. Pragmatism meant murdering the innocent to stop the monsters. Clark, Ramirez said urgently, her rifle tracking the predators. We can't save them. If those things hatch here, we're dead. The base is dead. These hunters will spread them like a plague. The woman in his arms looked up at him with desperate, dying eyes. El Ultimo, she whispered, please be merciful. Mercy? In his universe, Superman could have flown these people to the Fortress of Solitude, used Kryptonian technology to extract the parasites, saved every single one. Here, Clark Kent could only offer the mercy of a quick death versus the agony of being eaten alive from within. His hand tightened on the combistic. The predator's clicking intensified. Anticipation, excitement. They wanted to see if he'd break, if he'd compromise his heroic principles for pragmatic survival. This was their ultimate test of worthiness. I'm sorry, Clark said, and he meant it with everything he was. His heat vision lanced out, hot enough to cauterize, quick enough to be painless. The woman in his arms went still. Clark moved through the clearing like death itself, ending each life with precision that would have made Batman proud and horrified Superman in equal measure. 12 executions, 12 mercy killings, 12 compromises of everything he'd sworn to be. The predators watched in silence. When Clark finished, covered in ash and soot and the weight of his sins, he turned to face them. His eyes blazed with what remained of his heat vision, barely a candle flame but burning with righteous fury. Is this what honor means to you? He demanded, his voice carrying across the clearing. Breeding monsters, turning innocent people into incubators. This is your hunt. The largest predator stepped forward, 9 feet tall, armor decorated with dozens of skulls, a scarred elder with mandibles that clicked with ancient authority. It approached Clark slowly, studying him, then did something unexpected. It removed its biomask. The face beneath was alien, reptilian, mandibles lined with teeth, yellow eyes that held intelligence and something that might have been respect. The elder placed its fist over its chest, then extended its hand toward Clark, not in threat, in acknowledgement. It's offering you membership, Carlos whispered, awed. In their clan, you've passed their tests, killed their prey with honor, made the hard choice. It's treating you as blooded. Clark looked at the extended hand, at the elder's scarred face, at the assembled hunters waiting for his response. Join them. Become one of their warriors. Hunt across the stars with power and purpose, taking trophies and earning honor through violence. Never be weak again. Never face impossible choices again because might would make him right. The temptation was there, bitter and seductive. In his universe, he'd faced Darkseid's offer of godhood, Luthor's promises of power unrestrained by morality. He'd refused them all because Superman stood for something greater than power. But that had been when he was a god. Now, mortal and failing, what did his principles matter? He thought of Jonathan Kent, dying of a heart attack Superman couldn't prevent. Some things you can't punch your way through, son. Sometimes you just have to be human and accept you did your best. He thought of Lois, who'd loved Clark Kent more than Superman, who'd seen the man before the symbol. He thought of every person he'd saved in his universe, not through power, but through inspiration. The jumper who'd stepped back from the ledge not because Superman caught them, but because his presence reminded them life had meaning. The child who'd drawn his symbol on their cast and faced their fears. The hope that transcended physics. Clark Kent lowered the combistic and met the elder's eyes without flinching. No, he said simply. The clearing went silent. The elder's mandibles spread, surprise, perhaps anger. Its hand remained extended, offering power and brotherhood and escape from weakness. I don't hunt, Clark continued, his voice steady despite the fear threading his spine. I protect. What you do, turning people into prey, breeding monsters, measuring worth by kill counts, that's not honor. That's just survival of the cruelest. He gestured to the dead hosts, the temple, the assembled hunters. You call yourselves warriors, but you're just bullies with better technology. and I didn't survive everything I've been through to become like you." The elder lowered its hand slowly. Its mandibles clicked, rapid, furious communication with the assembled clan. Clark tensed, ready to fight, knowing it was futile. His powers were nearly gone. His strength was fading. He'd die here in this clearing, defiant to the end, but dead nonetheless. Ramirez raised her rifle. Carlos gripped his machete. 3 humans against a dozen predators. The math was simple. Then the elder did something that changed everything. It reached to its belt and drew a ceremonial blade, curved, glowing with some kind of energy, clearly ancient and precious. It drove the blade into the ground between them, then stepped back. The other predators lowered their weapons, mandibles clicking in what might have been approval. "What just happened?" Ramirez whispered. "It challenged you," Carlos said, voice shaking with awe. "One-on-one combat. Winner determines humanity's fate in this territory." He looked at Clark with desperate hope. "If you win, they'll leave. Honor demands it if you lose." If he lost, humanity remained prey. The hunts would continue. The villages would empty. More innocent people would become incubators for the hard meat. Everything would have been for nothing. Clark Kent, Last Son of Krypton, walked forward and pulled the blade from the earth. It was heavier than he expected, the handle designed for hands larger than his. The energy field hummed against his palm, hungry for violence. In his universe, he'd faced doomsday with his full power and nearly died. Here, he'd face an elder predator with strength that wouldn't lift a car, speed that wouldn't dodge bullets, durability that wouldn't stop a blade. The elder drew its own weapon, a staff that unfolded into a double-bladed spear, each edge crackling with plasma. It gestured to the temple steps, a ceremonial ground where countless challenges had been fought. Clark followed, ascending stones stained with old blood and the weight of everything. His lost home, his fading powers, the dead he'd mercy killed, the symbol on his chest, pressed down like planetary gravity. At the top, the elder turned and spread its mandibles in what might have been a smile. This was what it wanted, not a hunt, but a war. A test of will between mortal and alien, between principles and pragmatism. Clark raised the ceremonial blade and fell into a fighting stance Batman had drilled into him 1,000 years ago in another universe. He was going to lose. He knew it with brutal certainty. His strength was fading with every heartbeat. His speed was human level. His durability was barely enhanced. But he would fight anyway. Not because he could win, but because someone had to stand. Because the symbol on his chest, tattered and blood-stained as it was, still meant something. Because even in a universe that didn't believe in heroes, someone had to act like one mattered. The elder attacked. The elder moved like lightning wrapped in death. Its plasma spear carved the air where Clark's head had been a heartbeat before, the heat washing over him in waves that would have been meaningless once, but now singed his skin. He rolled, came up slashing with the ceremonial blade, and felt it skip off the elder's armor with a screech of protesting metal. The predator was faster, stronger, more experienced. Clark's diminished powers gave him barely an edge over human capability, and the elder had been hunting since before humanity built its first cities. The math was simple and brutal. Clark Kent was going to die on these temple steps. But he'd learned something in 3 days of jungle warfare, in mercy killings and impossible choices. Power wasn't everything. Sometimes, survival was about being smarter, more determined, more willing to sacrifice. The spear came again, a thrust aimed at his heart. Clark didn't dodge, couldn't. His speed was too far gone. Instead, he stepped into the blow, angling his body so the blade scraped along his ribs rather than punching through his chest. Pain exploded through his torso, but he was inside the elder's guard now, and he drove the ceremonial blade upward with everything he had left. The blade bit into the gap under the elder's arm, drawing green blood. Not a killing blow, not even close, but the first real wound. The assembled predators clicked in what might have been approval or might have been surprise. Their elder was bleeding. The impossible was happening. The elder backhanded him with casual contempt, and Clark felt something crack in his jaw. He hit the temple steps hard enough to bounce, rolled down 3 stone tiers, and lay there tasting blood and defeat. His enhanced healing was gone. The damage was staying. His body was failing in real time. "Get up," a voice said in his mind, Jonathan Kent's voice from a universe away. Being a hero isn't about never falling down. It's about always getting back up. Clark pushed himself to his knees. Blood dripped from his mouth, his vision swam, and every breath sent agony through his cracked ribs. The elder descended the steps slowly, spear ready for the killing blow, giving him time to surrender, to accept defeat with grace. Instead, Clark spat blood and rose to his feet. The elder's mandibles spread. Respect, perhaps, or acknowledgement of stubbornness that transcended species. It raised its spear for the final strike, and Clark knew with absolute certainty he couldn't dodge, couldn't block, couldn't survive. So he didn't try to survive, he attacked. His remaining strength drove him forward in a stumbling charge that shouldn't have worked, would never have worked against an opponent with this much experience. But the elder had expected defense, retreat, survival instinct, not a dying man's last desperate assault. Clark crashed into it with all his momentum, and they tumbled down the temple steps together in a tangle of limbs and weapons. They hit the clearing floor, and Clark's ceremonial blade was gone, knocked from his grip in the fall. The elder's spear had shattered against the stone. They grappled hand to hand, alien strength against fatting Kryptonian enhancement, and Clark felt his bones grinding under the pressure. The predator's mandibles snapped inches from his face, its breath hot and rank with the smell of old kills. Clark's hand found something, a shard of the broken spear, still crackling with residual energy. He didn't think, just acted. Drove the shard upward through the gap in the elder's armor into the soft tissue beneath. Green blood fountained, burning his hand with its acidic composition, but he held on, twisted, pushed deeper. The elder roared, a sound that shook the jungle canopy. Its fist hammered into Clark's ribs again and again, breaking what wasn't already broken. But Clark held on because letting go meant death for everyone. Held on through the pain and the fatting consciousness and the knowledge that his body was shutting down. The elder's roar became a gurgle. Its strength flagged. And Clark Kent, last son of Krypton, reduced to near-human capability in a universe that didn't believe in gods, killed an elder predator with a broken piece of its own weapon and stubbornness that transcended biology. The massive body went still. Clark rolled off it, gasping, and the world tilted sideways. Ramirez was there suddenly, holding him, shouting something he couldn't quite hear over the ringing in his ears. Carlos was pressing something against his side where the spear had carved a furrow. Blood, his blood, impossibly red, impossibly mortal, pooled on the temple stones. The assembled predators approached. Clark tried to rise to defend Ramirez and Carlos, but his body wouldn't respond. This was it then. He'd won the challenge but couldn't survive the victory. They'd swarm him now, take their revenge, and humanity would remain prey. The nearest predator knelt, removed its biomask, and placed its fist over its chest in salute. One by one, the others followed, 12 hunters acknowledging him, not as prey, not as an equal warrior, as something greater, a being who'd fought with honor despite being hopelessly outmatched, who'd chosen principle over survival, who'd proven that strength came from more than power. The predator who'd knelt reached to its belt and drew something, a small metal disc, intricately carved. It pressed the disc into Clark's bloody palm, then rose and clicked something to its fellows. As one, they activated their cloaking fields and melted into the jungle. Within seconds, only the elder's corpse remained as evidence they'd ever been there. What? Clark coughed, tasted more blood. What just happened? They acknowledged you, Carlos said, his voice thick with emotion. That disc, it's a mark of the blooded, only given to those who have earned their deepest respect. He looked at the retreating jungle where the predators had vanished. They're leaving. The hunts here will end. You You've done what 3 years of military operations couldn't do." Ramirez was already on her radio, calling for extraction, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Medevac to these coordinates. Critical patient. Move now." She looked down at Clark and there were tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "You crazy son of a bitch. You actually did it." Clark closed his eyes, feeling the disc pressing into his palm. The metal was warm, humming with some kind of energy. Through his fatting awareness, he felt something else, a pulse, a rhythm, spreading from the disc through his body. The Predator technology was doing something, recognizing his Kryptonian biology, interfacing with it in ways that shouldn't be possible. His cells, dying in this universe that rejected their impossible nature, suddenly had something to anchor to. The disc wasn't healing him. His wounds remained critical, but it was stabilizing him, preventing the complete systemic failure that had been seconds away. A gift from warriors to a fallen opponent they deemed worthy. The helicopter came an hour later, its rotors thundering over the canopy. They loaded Clark on a stretcher, Ramirez refusing to leave his side, Carlos guiding them back toward civilization. As they lifted off, Clark caught one last glimpse of the temple, the clearing, the elder's body already being claimed by the jungle. He'd won. Somehow, impossibly, reduced to near-human capability and facing odds that would have challenged Superman at full power, Clark Kent had won. Not through strength or speed or invulnerability, but through the one thing that transcended universes, the refusal to quit, even when quitting was the logical choice. The flight back to the base took 2 hours. Clark drifted in and out of consciousness, seeing glimpses of jungle giving way to civilization, of Ramirez's worried face, of medics swarming the helicopter when they landed. They rushed him to surgery, worked on him for 6 hours, pulled metal and stone fragments from wounds that should have killed him 3 times over. He woke 3 days later in a hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV drips and the antiseptic smell of modern medicine. Ramirez sat in a chair beside him, looking like she hadn't slept since the temple. "Welcome back," she said softly. "The doctors are calling you a medical miracle, the amount of trauma you survived." She shook her head. "But you're stable now, healing. They say you'll make a full recovery, though it'll take time." Clark tested his body carefully. The pain was immense but manageable. His strength, he flexed his hand, was still diminished, maybe 1 ton at best. His other powers remained mostly dormant, but he was alive. That had to count for something. "The Predators?" he asked, his voice rough from the breathing tube. "Gone. Every sensor we had in the jungle has been quiet for 3 days. The villages are reporting no attacks. It's like they vanished." She leaned forward. "Carlos has been talking to the indigenous people. They're calling what you did La Prueba del Ultimo, the trial of the last one. Says you've entered their legends already." Clark almost laughed, but it hurt too much. Legends. He'd been a legend in his universe, but that had been Superman, godlike, invulnerable, able to inspire through sheer presence. Here, he'd become a legend by bleeding, suffering, nearly dying, by being mortal and choosing to fight anyway. "There's something else," Ramirez said, pulling out the disc the Predator had given him. "Our tech people analyzed this. It's complicated, some kind of quantum technology keyed to your specific biology. It's been feeding you energy, keeping you stable, but it's also doing something else." She met his eyes. "It's been sending a signal into space. We think it's a beacon." Clark's stomach tightened, calling more of them. "We don't know, but if it is..." She didn't finish the thought. Didn't have to. If more Predators were coming, drawn by the beacon, then this victory was temporary. The war would begin again, and next time, Clark would face them without even the diminished powers that had let him survive this long. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, Clark Kent lay in a hospital bed, alive against all odds, having proven that heroism didn't require power. That the symbol on his chest, tattered, blood-stained, barely recognizable, still meant something fundamental. Hope, always hope, even when the god became mortal. The days that followed brought a strange normalcy. Clark healed slowly, his Kryptonian biology responding to treatment, but not with the rapid regeneration he'd once possessed. Visitors came, soldiers he'd saved, villagers who'd heard the stories, even a government official who tried to recruit him for some covert operation before Ramirez politely escorted him out. Through it all, Clark felt the disk's presence, pressed against his chest under bandages. The beacon pulsed steadily, calling into the void. And on the 7th day of his recovery, as he stood at the hospital window watching the sunset paint the jungle gold, the sky answered. The ship descended through clouds like a falling star, smaller than the temple's structure, sleeker, moving with purpose rather than menace. It landed in the field beside the hospital, and 3 figures emerged. Not predators, something else. They were humanoid, slender, wearing armor that seemed grown rather than forged. Their faces were obscured by helmets that resembled insect heads, and they moved with a grace that suggested either advanced technology or natural evolution toward perfect efficiency. They approached the hospital, and Clark felt the disk grow warm against his chest. Ramirez burst into his room, sidearm drawn. "We have visitors, unknowns. They're asking for you specifically." Clark pulled on a shirt, every movement still causing pain, and walked out to meet them. The 3 figures stood in the hospital lobby, ignoring the panicked staff and armed guards. When Clark appeared, they turned as one. The lead figure removed its helmet, revealing a face that was almost human, almost but not quite. Elongated features, eyes that held too much intelligence, skin with a faint iridescent sheen. "Kal-El of Krypton," it said in perfect English, its voice musical and strange. "We are arbiters of the Yautja Conclave. You bear the mark of the blooded. You defeated an ancient in honorable combat, and you rejected the hunt." The arbiter's head tilted, studying him. "This interests us greatly. We have been seeking one such as you." "Seeking me for what?" Clark asked, very aware that he was in no condition to fight, and that these beings' technology made Earth's military look primitive. "To offer choice," the arbiter said. "The Yautja respect strength, but they respect principle more. You have proven both. We can return you to your universe. Yes, we know what you are, where you are from. The beacon carried that information across dimensional barriers. We have the means to send you home." Clark's heart stopped. Home. Back to his universe, to Lois and Ma and the Justice League. Back to his powers and his purpose, and a world where he could actually save everyone. Everything he'd lost, everything he'd mourned, offered to him like a gift. "In exchange for what?" he asked, because nothing was free, not even across universes. "Your help," the arbiter said simply. "The multiverse is vast and contains horrors beyond your imagining. Beings that make the Yautja seem honorable by comparison. We defend against these threats, and we need warriors who understand that power without principle is merely destruction." It gestured to his chest, to the tattered symbol. "You have proven yourself in this universe, where your godhood was stripped away. Now we offer you the chance to be Superman again, but in service to something greater than one world, one universe." Clark looked at Ramirez, at the hospital full of people he'd fought beside, at the jungle beyond where villages were rebuilding because he'd made their nightmare end. He thought of the dead he'd mercy killed, the compromises he'd made, the pieces of his soul he'd traded for victory. In his universe, he'd been Superman, symbol of hope, champion of truth. Here he'd been Clark Kent, mortal, fallible, making impossible choices and living with consequences. Both had value. Both had cost. "I need time," he said finally, "to think, to decide." The arbiter inclined its head. "You have earned that right. We will return in 7 days. Consider carefully, Kal-El. The path you choose will echo across infinite worlds." They departed as suddenly as they'd arrived, their ship ascending into the sky and vanishing among the stars. Clark stood in the lobby, surrounded by stunned soldiers and terrified civilians, and felt the weight of choice pressing down like atmospheric pressure. Go home and be Superman again, Or stay here and be Clark Kent, mortal and limited, but having proven that heroism transcended power. 7 days to decide. 7 days to determine what the symbol really meant. The 7 days passed like a fever dream. Clark spent them walking the perimeter of the base, testing his healing body, feeling the limits that had become his new normal. His strength had plateaued at about 1,500 pounds, superhuman by this universe's standards, but a joke compared to what he'd been. His speed was good, maybe twice what an Olympic sprinter could manage in short bursts. His durability could stop small arms fire, but high-caliber rounds would punch through. His heat vision remained barely a candle flame. He was, by any measure, no longer Superman, just a man with enhanced abilities in a universe that didn't believe in gods. The villages sent representatives on the 3rd day. Old women with weathered faces, young men with hunting scars, children who drew his symbol in the dirt with sticks. They called him El Ultimo, El Hombre de Acero, Protector. They brought offerings, food, woven cloth, crude weapons, and asked for nothing in return except that he stay, that he keep standing between them and the darkness. "You gave us hope," one old woman said in Spanish, pressing a hand-carved wooden pendant into his palm. The symbol on it was rough but recognizable, his S, transformed by their perspective into something both alien and universal. Not because you're strong, because you chose to be brave when being afraid was wiser. Ramirez visited every evening, sitting with him on the roof of the medical building, watching the sunset paint the jungle in impossible colors. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. She understood the weight he carried, the choice that loomed. On the 5th day, she finally broke the silence. "What would Superman do?" she asked. Clark laughed bitterly. Superman would have already decided. He'd have analyzed the tactical advantage of returning home, weighed the cosmic good against the local need, and made the logical choice. He touched the tattered cape he still wore, even though it was just cloth now, no Kryptonian tech to make it indestructible. But Clark doesn't know. "Then maybe that's your answer," she said. "Superman was a god making godlike decisions. Clark Kent is a man making human choices, and maybe that's what this universe needs, not another god but a man willing to stand anyway." The words settled into him like seeds in fertile soil. That night, lying in his hospital bed, Clark dreamed of Lois. She stood in the Daily Planet office, looking at him with those eyes that had always seen through the glasses and the bumbling act to the truth beneath. "What do you want, Smallville?" Lois asked. "Not what Kansas says you should want, not what the League expects. What does Clark Kent want?" He woke before dawn on the 7th day, the answer crystallizing like ice in his chest. He knew what he had to do. The knowledge sat there, heavy and certain, and he carried it through the morning routine, through breakfast with recovering soldiers, through the walk to the landing field where the Arbiter's ship descended precisely at noon. The 3 beings emerged, their insected helmets gleaming in the tropical sun. The lead Arbiter approached Clark with something in its hands, a device that hummed with barely contained power, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Have you decided, Kal-El?" it asked. Clark looked at the device. Through it he could feel his universe calling, the familiar solar signature of his Earth sun, the quantum signature of the Speed Force, the magical resonance of his reality's fundamental laws. One touch and he'd be home. His powers would return within hours of yellow sun exposure. He could see Lois again, fight beside the League, be Superman again in truth rather than memory. "I have a question first," Clark said. "This device can send me home, but what happens to this universe after I leave? The Predators gave their word to stop hunting here, but words break, promises fade, and there are other threats. I've seen evidence of xenomorph infestations in 3 other regions, heard reports of something worse moving through Southeast Asia." The Arbiter's expression was unreadable. "This universe will continue as it has, struggling, surviving, dying. We do not intervene in natural selection." Natural selection. Clark tasted the words like poison. These people aren't being naturally selected, they're being farmed, hunted for sport, used as incubators for bioweapons. That's not evolution, it's cruelty. Even so, we offer you a choice, not salvation for an entire world. The Arbiter extended the device. Your decision must be made. Will you return to your universe and serve the greater multiversal good? Or will you remain here, mortal and diminished, clinging to one small world that will forget you the moment something stronger arrives? Clark looked past the Arbiters to where Ramirez stood with her soldiers, to where Carlos waited with representatives from a dozen villages, to where children drew his symbol in the dirt, not because he was invulnerable, but because he'd stood when standing was all he could do. He thought of Jonathan Kent, who'd raised a god as a man, who'd taught him that power was meaningless without compassion, that strength meant nothing if you didn't use it to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He thought of Martha Kent, who'd sewn that first cape from blankets and told him the symbol his Kryptonian parents gave him could mean anything he chose. But once chosen, he had to live up to it. He thought of Lois Lane, who'd loved Clark Kent more than Superman, who'd seen that the man mattered more than the powers, that heroism was a choice renewed daily, not a gift granted by yellow sun radiation. And he thought of Batman, standing in the watchtower after Brother Eye had nearly killed them all, saying, "Being a hero isn't about what you can do. It's about what you choose to do, even when every choice is terrible." Clark Kent took the device from the Arbiter's hands, felt its power thrumming against his palm, felt the doorway home opening like a wound in reality. Through it, he could hear the familiar sounds of his Earth, police sirens, rushing wind, and Lois calling his name. Then he crushed the device in his fist. The technology shrieked, reality warping as containment failed. The Arbiters moved faster than thought, shields snapping up, containing the dimensional breach before it could tear the universe apart. When the light faded, the device was slag in Clark's hand, and the doorway home was gone. "That was unwise," the lead Arbiter said, its musical voice carrying an edge that might have been anger or respect. "We cannot create another. The materials are rare beyond measure. You have made your choice irrevocable." "I know," Clark said. His hand was burned where the device had melted, but he barely felt it. "I'm staying." "Why?" The Arbiter's genuine confusion was almost funny. "You could be a god again, fight threats across infinite universes, save countless worlds. Instead, you choose one backward planet, limited powers, inevitable mortality. Explain this logic." Clark looked at his burned palm, at the tattered cape hanging from his shoulders, at the symbol on his chest that had been shredded and stained and reduced to barely recognizable cloth. But it was still there, still visible, still meaning something. "Because Superman is what I could be," he said quietly. "But Clark Kent is who I am. And these people," he gestured to the assembled humans, "they don't need a god making godlike decisions. They need a man willing to stand with them. Someone who knows what it costs to fight when victory isn't guaranteed. Someone who's faced their mortality and chosen to be brave anyway." He turned to face the Arbiters fully. "In my universe, I inspired hope because I was invulnerable. Here, I can inspire hope because I'm not. Because if someone like me, stripped of everything that made him super, can still choose to fight, then anyone can. That's worth more than any multiversal war." The Arbiter was silent for a long moment. Then it inclined its head, not a bow, but acknowledgement of something it didn't quite understand but had to respect. "The Yacha were correct about you," it said. "You are unusual. We will report this to the Conclave. Perhaps they will find value in your choice." It gestured to its companions and they moved toward their ship. Then it paused. "The beacon in your mark, it remains active. Should you change your mind or should this world face threats beyond your capability, it will call us. Consider it a gift for rejecting power in favor of principle." The ship lifted off, ascending through the atmosphere and vanishing among the stars. Clark stood in the landing field, feeling the weight of his choice settle into his bones. He'd given up everything. His universe, his powers, Lois, the League, everything that had defined him for years, to stay in a hostile reality as a shadow of what he'd been. And yet, as Ramirez approached with tears streaming down her face, as Carlos clapped him on the shoulder with a grin that split his weathered face, as children ran forward to touch his cape, and soldiers saluted him with fists over their hearts, Clark felt something he hadn't felt since arriving in this universe. "Peace, crazy son of a bitch," Ramirez said, pulling him into a fierce hug. "You actually stayed." "Someone has to," Clark said. "And besides," he looked at the assembled crowd, at the hope shining in their eyes, "I think Clark Kent might be needed here more than Superman was needed there." The weeks that followed were busy. Ramirez's superiors, initially skeptical, became believers when 3 more xenomorph nests were discovered, and Clark led teams to destroy them before they could mature. His diminished powers were still more than enough to tear through chitinous armor and withstand acid spray that would kill normal humans. Word spread. More villages requested his help. More threats emerged from the jungle. Clark established a base of operations in a village called Nueva Esperanza, New Hope, because apparently the universe had a sense of irony. He trained locals in combat tactics, taught them to recognize predator signs and xenomorph traces, and helped them build defenses that didn't rely on one man with fatting powers. "You're building something," Ramirez observed one evening, watching him work with a group of teenagers on hand-to-hand combat. "Not just protecting them, teaching them to protect themselves." "That's what Superman should have done," Clark said. "Inspired people to be their own heroes instead of making them dependent on godlike intervention." He watched the teenagers spar, their techniques rough but improving. "Here, I don't have a choice. I can't be everywhere at once, can't save everyone, so I'm teaching them that they don't need a god, they need each other." 3 months after the Arbiters left, a Predator ship appeared over Nueva Esperanza. Clark tensed, ready for another war, but the ship just hovered there. Then a figure descended on some kind of gravity lift, not in armor but in ceremonial robes. It was one of the Predators from the temple, its mandibles spread in what Clark had learned was a smile. It approached slowly, hands empty and open. From its robes, it produced a package wrapped in that same biomechanical material the xenomorphs used, but purified somehow. It offered the package to Clark with both hands, a gesture of respect. Inside was armor. Not Predator armor, something unique, crafted specifically for human proportions but using their advanced technology. Lightweight, flexible, with energy shielding that would protect against plasma fire. And woven into the chest piece, rebuilt using materials that shouldn't exist on Earth, was his symbol. The S that meant hope, reconstructed by alien hands as acknowledgement of principle over power. "They made this for you," Carlos translated the Predator's clicks. "As an apology, with respect. They say the hunts will not resume here, but other threats exist. You will need protection." Clark ran his fingers over the symbol. It glowed faintly, powered by some Predator technology he didn't understand. But it was there. His mark, his purpose. Reforged in a universe that didn't believe in gods but had learned to believe in a man who chose to stand anyway. "Thank them," Clark said, "and tell them I hope we meet again as allies, not enemies." The Predator clicked something that needed no translation, respect between warriors. Then it ascended back to its ship and vanished into the sky. Clark wore the armor on his next mission. A rescue operation in Peru where a drug cartel had inadvertently awakened something in an ancient temple. The armor held against small arms fire, absorbed the impact of a xenomorph's tail strike, and the energy shielding saved his life when a Predator's plasma bolt would have taken his head off. He fought alongside Ramirez's team, alongside local militia, alongside people who'd learned that heroes weren't born. They were made, one choice at a time. The mission was messy. 3 soldiers died, and Clark felt each loss like a knife to the chest. No invulnerability to protect them. No super speed to arrive in time. just tactical decisions and desperate fighting and the knowledge that he'd saved 12 others. That night, sitting in Nueva Esperanza's square, surrounded by people who'd come to depend on him, Clark looked up at the stars and wondered if he'd made the right choice. Then a child approached, a girl, maybe 7, who'd lost her parents to a xenomorph attack. She held a crude drawing of him in his new armor, the symbol bright and hopeful. "My teacher says you're not really Superman," she said in Spanish. "She says you're just a man pretending." Clark knelt to her level, smiled. "Your teacher is right. I'm not Superman anymore. I'm just Clark Kent trying his best." "But you still wear the symbol," the girl pointed out. "I do," Clark agreed, "because the symbol isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about hope, about standing up when it would be easier to stay down, about protecting people even when you're scared." He touched the glowing S on his chest. "Anyone can wear a symbol, but you have to live up to it, every single day." The girl studied him with solemn eyes. Then she smiled. "I think Clark Kent is better than Superman." As the girl ran off to play, Clark felt something settle in his chest, not peace exactly, but purpose. He'd lost his universe, his powers, everything that had defined him, but he'd found something else, something that maybe mattered more. He'd found that heroism didn't require godhood, that hope could thrive even in the darkest universe, that a man, mortal and limited, could still make a difference if he just kept standing. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant. Among them, predator ships hunted. Xenomorph queens laid their eggs. Threats beyond imagining lurked in the darkness between worlds. And somewhere out there, his universe continued without him. The League fighting, Lois investigating, life moving forward as if Superman had never existed. But here, in Nueva Esperanza, in this universe of predators and prey, Clark Kent stood watch. Not as a god, not as an invulnerable symbol, just as a man who'd chosen to be brave when being afraid was wiser, who'd chosen to hope when despair was logical, who'd chosen to stand when falling would have been easier. The tattered cape stirred in the evening breeze. The armor hummed with alien power, and the symbol on his chest, rebuilt by hands that respected principle over strength, glowed softly in the darkness. Somewhere a village needed protection. Somewhere a xenomorph nest was growing. Somewhere a predator was deciding whether to hunt or to honor its word. And somewhere Clark Kent would be there, diminished but unbroken, teaching this universe that hope didn't require power. It just required someone willing to keep standing. Always standing,